Hi YouTube, welcome to another edition of Horror Hands, and for this video I'm going to be talking about Faces of Death. Yes, the original video nasty shockumentary that shocked the world upon its release. So I'm going to be just going into a bit of the film itself. I'm going to talk about the things that go on in this film because I did just rewatch it to remind myself of the movie. And then just go into looking at whether or not it still holds up in this day and age. So yeah, it's always an interesting one. Is Faces of Death. So Faces of Death was released in 1978. It was an American production, but they had backing from Japanese investors who wanted to see sort of a real death compilation, and they got some American filmmakers to put it together, and that's how it came about. And it was released with the notion that it was exposing the world of death to the audience, and it would be showing real life death and suffering for everyone to see. So of course lots of people were horrified, but equally people were curious and did check this movie out, so much so that it grossed a lot of money upon its release and was a huge hit in the VHS era, which was starting upon the same time of Faces of Death's release. So we'll go into more about sort of the film itself. I just thought I'd talk you through some of the things you can expect from the film. Now, like I say, this is a shockumentary. It does feature some real life violence and death and gore, and some of that does involve animals. So if you don't want to hear about that, feel free to skip this review. I don't want to upset anyone. But yeah, the movie opens and we get a pretty in-depth look at some open heart surgery. And there's someone with the chest cavity all opened up and the heart's there pumping away, and this surgeon's tinkering around with it and prodding it and things like that. It's a pretty strong scene. It's not particularly horrifying. It's more just kind of eye-opening, really. You don't see things like that all that much. At least I don't. So pretty interesting start. And then we get the title card, and then we are introduced to our host for the movie, Dr. Francis P. Gross, who comes out of his surgery room and lets us know that he is a guy who has been studying the many faces of death, and he has a library of death scenes stored up, which he's going to take us through and explain and that kind of thing. And I always really liked the Dr. Gross host of the show. I did think that was quite a nice touch that we have someone kind of holding our hand and taking us through it all. It always kind of made me laugh a little bit. He was never the kind of guy who I would expect to host this kind of horrifying documentary. He looks a bit sort of a bit kooky more than anything. Like his glasses are askew and he always looked a bit unkempt, which made me smile. And I don't know what the deal was with his supposed doctor's surgery. He looks more like he stood in someone's living room or kitchen, which I'm sure he probably was actually. But yeah, that always made me smile, that it looked nothing like a surgery room. But so yeah, he takes us through these many things. So the movie starts, we get a few sort of scenes of dead bodies and cadavers in various state of decay, just I suppose setting us up for the more harder stuff, and we get a look at that and what goes on with them and things like that. And then at about the 10-minute mark, now this is where you get into the hardest of what Faces of Death is. This is, for me, is the most difficult part of it, and it all involves animals, unfortunately. It really does kind of throw us into the harsh deep end. So we have scenes of dog fighting, some pit bulls fight until one of them has been killed. There's a chicken being killed on a farm, his head gets chopped off. One of the hardest scenes of all is the slaughterhouse scene. We see the process of cows and sheep being slaughtered, right to the point where they walk in. We see what goes on inside in very, very gruesome detail, right to where they show what's on the plate. It's pretty horrifying. It's not the most humane of slaughterhouses. it has to be said. And then another really shocking one is the seal scene. We get a bit of them killing seals for their fur. So really hard stuff. It's yeah, that to me is the toughest part of Faces of Death, and that's from like 10 minutes to 30 minutes in. So yeah, that's really going to test the animal lovers, and really does set this up as quite a strong documentary or shockumentary. There's one animal related scene in it which I can confirm, fortunately, is fake, and that's the monkey brain eating scene. We see some people sat around a table, they bash a monkey on the head and eat the brains. It's entirely fake. It was all done with special effects. It was a fake monkey head, and I believe they used cauliflower and a bit of sort of fake blood and stuff to make it look like the monkey brain, and it was actually the director's friends that were supposedly eating the brains. Would have been a horrifying scene if it was real, but I have had confirmation or read confirmation that that one was fake. So that's, I guess that's good. So after that, after about 30 minutes in, we then get a bit of sort of wild and wacky stuff. We get the supposed alligator attack where a guy falls into a swamp and an alligator kills him. You don't really see much. It's all shaky footage. We then get a segment on like serial killers and sort of assassins. There's an interview with sort of this masked assassin who tells us what he does and why he does it, and a few tricks of his trade and things like that. And then we get a few more scenes of bodies and scenes from like a morgue and where they're being sort of touched up and put back together and that kind of thing. Kind of shocking to see just dead bodies laid out like that and having the skin pulled off and pulled up and things. But I've seen worse nowadays, but I imagine that would have been pretty strong stuff back then. We then have the electrocution scene, the guy who is executed in the electric chair. And this is probably my, I guess, favourite bit of Faces of Death. And it's also, I think, one of the more iconic scenes. It was used for a lot of the poster art and things like that. So yeah, they strap a guy, he's in jail for like killing an old woman or something, and they lead him down and strap him into the electric chair, and then we get a look at him being electrocuted. They put the tapes over his eyes and things like that. And I always thought that scene was real. When I watched it when I was younger, I was convinced that scene was real. It looked kind of authentic at the time, and I have to say the guy looks pretty terrified. He really does look like he's about to be electrocuted. And turns out that scene was fake as well. That was actually filmed at the director's house with another one of his friends, and it wasn't real. It had fake blood that came from him. The drool that comes from him being electrocuted is actually toothpaste, so it's all fake. I think that's a really good scene though. It's acted out really well. It looks pretty cool. Watching it again, there are some telltale signs that it is fake. There's a lot of sort of zoom shots and camera angles which you don't tend to see in execution videos, and there is a bit of production value to it which gives it away, but I still maintain that is a really well done scene. We then cut to some sort of like Middle Eastern place, I believe, and there's a bit of there's a beheading execution which again looks really well done, but I'm told it was fake. It's not real. But I'll give them credit. That one looks pretty good as well. So some good special effects at the helm of Faces of Death, if nothing else. We then get to a bit of a weird section of the movie where we look at kind of cults and just weird practices and people sort of messing around with snakes and a few religious things going on. It gets a bit tight. At this point, you're sort of getting to an hour into the movie and it's starting to drag a little bit. It's getting a bit tiresome. It's already a hard-hitting thing, and it's just becoming a bit plodding and a bit weird, and they tend to go on and focus on things a bit too long. So at this point, I'm starting to wane a little bit in terms of my interest, but that goes on for a while. There's a scene of someone that's washed up on a beach who's drowned. It's a drowned victim. Looks pretty real. I don't know for sure on that one, but it looks, yeah, looks pretty authentic. Whether it is or not, I don't know. They could have done some makeup, but it's done pretty well. So that one goes on. It then moves on to a few natural disasters, a few fires, buildings falling down, floods and things like that, sort of like extreme news footage. And then even dabbles in sort of pollution and what humans are doing to pollute the earth, which I guess was a sort of conscientious thing to do if you want. Not particularly shocking or all that fitting for a shockumentary, but at least to get the message across. We're past the hour mark now, and it's, like I say, it's dragging a bit. We do get a bit of shocking footage next. We get some war footage. So, World War II footage mainly, and some pretty nasty stuff from the concentration camps. As you can imagine, we see the awful treatment of the Jews in there, and a few scenes that you probably wouldn't typically see in your average documentary. Yeah, that is quite unpleasant, and of course that is all real. We then have a few sort of crashes, a few car crashes, stunt crashes gone wrong. They look pretty fake. There's a bit of a plane crash, and then the footage of the aftermath of a plane crash, which seems to go on forever, where they just focus on the debris and some blood flowing from the plane and things like that. It's pretty unpleasant stuff, but again, it's really starting to drag now, and we're sort of at like an hour and a half. And then one of the last scenes, and it's the most ridiculous scene in the movie, is the seance scene, where a woman goes to a seance and apparently connects with some spirit, and we see a really badly animated spirit above her, which is, of course, entirely fake. Somewhat hurts the film's credibility, to be honest, for it to end on such a silly bit of footage. And then we end with a surprisingly kind of upbeat ending, where we just see a newborn baby that's born, and the mother walking on the beach with it, and just holding it in her arms, and it's quite a nice sort of softy ending, really. I guess it's sort of to highlight the cycle of life and death, I suppose. Interesting way to end it. And that's pretty much Faces of Death. Shocking in some parts, educational in some parts, and then just kind of drags in others. So the movie itself, like I say, I just rewatched it to remind myself what it's like. I gotta say, I forgot how boring the movie is. It really does kind of go on a bit too long. Some of it's, as I say, some of it's kind of okay, but very little of it in this day and age is shocking. And having now, I've seen other kind of shockumentaries and shock videos which are way worse and way more hardcore. This really does kind of lessen the impact that Faces of Death has now. I don't think it holds up all that well in this day and age, in answer to my original question, unfortunately. Having said that, I do have a great deal of respect for this movie. I wasn't around in 1978, so I can only imagine how a concept like this would have blown people's mind, and for it to have been released commercially and kind of done as well as it did is pretty impressive. I mean, in places like Japan, this was one of the highest grossing movies. This was like up there with E.T. and Empire Strikes Back. And it was a really important part of the home video boom as well, because as I say, both this and home video were released at the same time, and this was a huge hit on video. This was one of the big reasons why video was so successful, because this sort of rented constantly, and then it rented so much people couldn't get it, and then it became even more mythical because you couldn't get hold of it, and of course there was the crazy rumours like people have watched it and gone insane seeing all this death and things like that. So yeah, I can imagine in 1978 this would have absolutely shocked people to the core. And of course back then people weren't as cynical or aware of things, so they couldn't look up whether it was real or fake. They probably just took it as it's all real. And yeah, my goodness, that would have been really, really hard hitting. But yeah, I read recently that the Faces of Death is 60% real, 40% fake. I guess that's about right. I would have probably plumped for more if it was fake than that, but apparently that's the ratio of this one. And there were a number of sort of quite well-known special effects people that worked on it who have kind of tried to come forward and get some credit to it, but they just don't, because at the time this was kind of underground. There was no kind of union for them. They kind of worked on it without any sort of contract, so never got any credit, and that's how they kind of managed to pass this as being legit, and that, you know, people hadn't worked on it, and it wasn't fake, which I thought was pretty interesting. But yeah, you can't. I don't think you can take away its legacy and what this kind of did, and you know, it's paved the way for a number of other shockumentaries and Mondo style compilations. I have to say they're all pretty much stronger than what Faces of Death is in this day and age, but it's still a cool movie. And whilst I was actually researching this, I did come across a bit of trivia that did make me laugh a little bit. You shouldn't laugh, but in 1985, this was actually shown in a school classroom. They actually showed it, I guess, for educational reasons, and two of the students were so traumatized by it, they sued the school, and they won. They had a payout of $100,000 because Faces of Death traumatized them so much, which is just crazy. But yeah, and then for a while, this was the director of Face of Death. It was always a mystery as to who actually directed it. I think the credits on the film is Conan Desailly, something like that. Actually directed by a guy called John Swartz. I hope I remember that right. Yeah, he directed it, and he actually, a few years ago, he was diagnosed with cancer. And before he was going to die from cancer, he did actually reveal all of the scenes that were faked in the movie. Ironically, he did actually survive the cancer, and he lived another 12 years, unfortunately passed away in 2019. Seemed like a cool guy from his interviews, seemed like a friendly enough guy. But yeah, so yeah, that is Faces of Death, not the original, but the front runner shockumentary. So interesting to watch it again. I've seen way worse nowadays, and as I say, it has lost a lot of its edge. But like I say, I really do respect it, and it still has a bit of a power. You know, when I put it on, I still had a few sort of nervous butterflies for can I handle all of this death. But yes, I did. So yeah, so let me know what you think of that, guys. Let me know what you think of this movie. Did you see it? Did it traumatize you, or did you see through it like some people did? I'd be really interested to know. So thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for more videos.